What's up, everyone? It's your lady, Amy the Seventh, with another episode of Pretty Woman Speaks. And I have a pretty woman in the building. This is Emily Williams. And I had the opportunity to start to get to know her during our amazing program we're going through to get our executive MBA. So I'm really excited that she and I are on the course together to be women in power, women in leadership, right? Because it is time for women to take our piece of the pie. So say hello, with Emily.
Hey everyone, it's so awesome to be here and a privilege to get to know you better, and it's just an amazing way for us to build this connection through the program, and I totally agree. It's like a phoenix moment for all of us to step in, and I love that, the program that we're doing is giving access to this type of credential and education to more people and really broadening the reach and making it more accessible to women like us to come in and build our confidence and step into a new light. It's great.
Exactly. That's definitely something that I'm glad that you're mentioning about stepping into our confidence, because it is really important that when you chase these dreams that you exude confidence, because there are going to be moments where you question yourself, like, am I really supposed to be doing this? Am I really here now? So
totally. I think it's something that I've been sort of pondering for a long time, and it's just sometimes it just happens at the right time and place, and starting with a little clickbait moment on LinkedIn, being recruited, and being like, oh, I've always wanted to do that. I should do it. There's no reason for me not to try. And then, I was accepted and got in and just decided to go for it. So it's awesome that, we're both taking this leap of faith together. And I'm sure it's just the beginning of a lot of what we'll learn about each other and bond through lots of hard work.
Yes, exactly.
A new experience.
And I'm really glad to have this new experience with you and our other hundreds of cohorts, because you really can't believe that it's like 300 plus of us, just because we're all across online, all across the world. But when you take those classes with our professor, and he say, announce where you are, in all of their cities and countries pop up, and you be like, wow, I'm really connected.
It's like light bright on the globe.
Yeah, exactly. So it's amazing to connect with people. And in connecting with Emily, I had learned that she had roots in Maine. And it was interesting because when I was getting to know her, she talked about, now that the lockdown is lifting.
And that shelter-in-place order has also been lifted as law enforcement agents map out where the suspect could possibly be, his escape routes. They're looking into all of that.
To me, it was startling because it's becoming almost like a new normal for many of us across America, with experiencing terrifying experiences, even if it's indirectly connected. You're still touched by those things. And for me, before we hopped on this interview, I was talking about, when I think of Maine, I think of lobster, I think of seafood. So, to go from that stark difference from, seafood, yummy, to, wow, devastating, of Maine experiencing its worst mass shooting in its state's history.
From Lewiston, Maine, the scene of a horrific mass shooting here. At least 18 dead and at least 13 injured, several of them critically. And tonight, as we come on the air here, there is an urgent manhunt for the suspected gunman. Authorities say a U.S. Army reservist. The shootings at two different locations, one of them at a bowling alley right here behind us. Families, children playing in a youth bowling league. 12 minutes later, at a second location, a bar and grill here. And all day today, as we were driving through these communities, reporting on this awful story, the alerts going out on our phones, we all got them. Everyone getting these signals here that the shelter-in-place order has been extended across two counties.
And even right now, this year is now America's worst mass shooting, just this year alone. It makes me want to ask Emily, what is the mood in the state now for having such a transition now?
Yeah, thank you. It's I think a really contemplative moment. If I could, I think just to echo what you said, and you spoke about a lot of things that I really cherish about Maine. It's the ocean, it's the mountains, it's the quality of people, it's the sense of community, it's the the quaintness of that place and how, it's a small, tight community that's really resilient, really hardworking, really genuine people. And it is the last place on earth I would ever have expected to experience something like this. And so it shatters your heart, and it breaks it wide open. And I think the mood initially, everybody was very quiet. I think there's this, the cycles of things. Even you could probably, a relatable experience that we've all had recently is the pandemic. It first happened and you start reaching out to people. Who do you know where? How are they? Is anybody sick? Is everybody okay? Do you know anybody that's been impacted directly? How is this impacting your community directly? How is it impacting businesses really directly? And in the first few days, it was really scary when we are all encouraged to shelter in place, which I think was actually a really appropriate response.
A live look right now from Bowdoin, Maine. That's about 20 miles from where the shootings took place last night in Lewiston. We know an urgent manhunt is underway right now, and tens of thousands of people across that state of Maine being asked to shelter in place.
This is impacting at least 4 communities, including the second largest city in the state, Lewiston, and therefore at least 74,000 Maine residents. Now, our colleague Alex Capriello on the ground is now reporting these orders have just extended. These numbers do not take into consideration those extensions. We're looking into those right now. But this is also an incredibly wide range of school districts, universities, businesses, and churches now that are not under these specific orders, but they have been closed as a result of this manhunt.
I mean, we can get into that a little bit more, but, and then when the shelter in place was lifted and people kind of started going, businesses for the first day after it happened were all closed, really. Like most businesses were really closed. And then the second day, even though the suspect hadn't been found, things were starting to trickle open. I just felt like it was very somber. This just is something that, because Maine is so small, it's probably more people than not are connected to somebody or something, or can relate to the experience on any side, whether it's a victim or somebody that they know that they're close to that's struggling with mental health issues, or law enforcement, or you just name it. There's so many different things that this impacts for us. So it's powerful, and the weight of that is really strong. I think that what I'm hopeful is that we'll work together and really start rebuilding. I think that that's the beauty of being in a small, intimate place like that. So what I've always loved about Maine is just the really compelling sense of community that's there, and the resiliency of the people that are there. But it's going to take time. It's really, really sad all around. There's not much about it that's positive, except that it helps crack some of these things open and helps us kind of work together and rebuild and gives us a new opportunity. I like to think about really tough things that way, that it is an opportunity to look closer, to learn from each other, to grapple these really difficult issues and see how we can be helpful and supportive, how we can just lend a listening ear. So it's great to have the opportunity just to be with you and build this connection. There's so many, there's a lot of good that can come from it too, I hope, in the days ahead, but it's been hard.
Yeah, you've said a lot, but what I really wanted to know is that you mentioned Maine is a really close-knit community. Someone knows somebody that's connected to this unfortunate incident. What I really wanted to know, Emily, was that when it happened, where were you when you first heard about the news? When news first broke, where were you? What were you doing?
I was home with my family. I was visiting for the weekend, and ironically, I heard from somebody out of state first, because I think they got a news alert. I don't always have news alerts on my phones, and it happened and was reported sort of between news time. So I think it happened around 7:30 at night, and then I heard about it. The news that I heard was actually from a text message of a friend on the West Coast, so that was kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I started, looking online and looking at the news and, trying to understand what was going on. There's that immediate thing of like, oh, wow, it sort of paralyzes you. Like, what do I do now? This has happened it's probably about 25 miles from my home. It wasn't very far, but even in that first evening, I believe that they mentioned that threats were also made further south of us. So really the whole, the area that I'm in is sort of between those two locations. So Lewiston is further north and Saco is further south from where we are. So we're kind of in the middle. But, I don't know that you necessarily think that it's, someone's going to be knocking on your door, but it's, it does feel really close and so shockingly unexpected, But I was lucky. I was fortunate to be with family. We were able to just support each other and kind of hunker down at home and talk through our plan, how we were going to help kind of keep each other accountable and stay home. And, it's also a balance of, wondering how this is going to directly affect you and what part of your routine should you do? Does it make sense to do? Is it safe to do, right, in the next few hours or days following something like this? So I was definitely grateful to be home.
Yeah, I know that's there is no place like home.
There's no place like home.
Yeah, exactly. And so knowing that your routine had to switch up, you had to think differently, you had to account for moments of possibly running into this killer that's still on the loose. Walk me through what was the type of talks that your family and your friends were having, potentially running into this guy as police continue to look for him?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And my dad, I think I mentioned to you too, my dad's a small business owner, so he has a catering and event planning business, and he has a few employees who work for him full time, and they have a big warehouse space, so I was kind of talking to him in the morning, especially of I read the news that businesses were closing, and I asked him what he wanted to do. He personally chose to go in, but he gave everybody in his company the option to do that or not. It was really respectful of their feelings around it. It's really sensitive. Nobody knows exactly what everybody else's response is going to be. My mom is a social worker, and I'm pretty sure, we talked about just having her, making sure her clients had the option of just doing their sessions virtually rather than in person. Sort of following the path of discouraging folks from just being out. And, even if you're going to an appointment, which is one-on-one, you might be going to the grocery store on the way and those are closed. There's a lot of, nobody knows exactly what's best for them in any sort of situation. But for us, we chose to stay close and just make sure we knew what we were all doing. If we were going to go somewhere, we would just communicate about that. But for the most part, I just stayed home.
Yeah, I can understand that. No, for real.
Mostly because I was like, where am I going to go? It was partially fear, but also partially, it's if I'm going to a store, most of them were closed. But if there's nothing to me that it's sort of like the pandemic kind of mentality. There's nothing that I need so desperately right now until I have more information that I couldn't wait, right? Mm-hmm. I tried not to be too glued to the TV either, and I think that one of the things that we can talk about a little bit more is that I do think that the way that the media was managed through this was really positive too. I mean, they were really told to come to press conferences for information and not get too close to the investigation because it was a very dangerous situation. They didn't want people who they wanted law enforcement to be closest to the investigation than people who were trying to capture it on media. So so that was kind of an interesting thing that I hadn't seen in that way before.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that you are actually talking about, because I would love to have from your perspective how news, as a person that works in news, how is news covering mass shootings now that one's very close to you, close to your home? How do you think it was handled by the media?
I think that they were given really clear guardrails, but I do think that they seem to be pretty respectful of that. I think it's really easy in a situation like this to start a lot of hypothesis and speculation, and it's easy for the game of telephone to sort of shift, and evolve a conversation or evolve facts over time. So I do think that the way that they strongly encouraged people to stay at a distance and then come to the press conferences that they had. In the beginning, I think it was twice a day, and then it was just once a day. So they had one once they found the suspect, once they found him.
I stand here tonight to simply report that the Maine State Police have located the body of Robert Card in Lisbon. He is dead. I've called President Biden to inform him about this news.
So our reality here is that the search has been extensive. It's been thorough. It's been nonstop since the minute we started speaking with you and long before that. So all of these options are on the table, as we knew. We continue to search locations, in some cases multiple times. And we will have more information about exactly how this went down. We're going to have another briefing tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. And I would please encourage you to think about next steps from your end, information that you would find important. And I will say that this is not going to be a long Q&A this evening. We wanted to make sure that we got this information out as fast as possible and as responsible as possible.
The night that they found him, they had a session about 2 hours after that, but they were careful when they, the delay was because they really wanted to first give information to the victims' families and to the suspect family, which I really thought was very respectful of both sides. So they wanted to release the information that he had been found so that fear could go away, right? But the limited details that they shared in the very beginning, I just thought were delivered in a very calculated and respectful manner to the families. We have to all remember that as close as we think we are to something like this, there are people who are really directly impacted, who are, we're all grieving, but that's just for them. It's important to hear it more directly from the people who have been involved in the investigation rather than hearsay, right? And so I think that was a really compassionate approach that I don't think that it could be happening in other places, but I hadn't seen it in that way. And so it was nice to hear, people really being kept in line and saying, well, if there's information that we can't release, we're being really clear about why. And so you stop asking prying questions about, it's very sensitive, as we've kind of talked about, with issues like gun control and mental health and, and law enforcement and children and, it's just there's just, you name it. There's just there's a domino effect of a really, big, there's just I don't even know what to say, but it's just a very overwhelming amount of information and things that are impacted by something like this. So I do think that they were very, I liked that they were very careful about that. It felt very, very sincere and thoughtful, and discouraging people in the media to be picketing at the family's home of the suspect, and there was a lot that we didn't know, and so there's a lot of assumption that you make and then ways that you act on that, and I think that was really discouraged, and I thought that was all really positive, just to make sure that we were all being really mindful of all sides of this, even though we might not have that compassion in that moment. How can we think about it a little bit differently and remember that even the suspect's family lost a family member too in a really tragic way, and that was painful for them as well.
Exactly. Yeah. You talked a lot about mindfulness, and in your bio you study cultural anthropology, and so I'm curious, and I don't know if I'm in the right direction or not, but you can let me know if I am. But, I'm curious to really understand, with your background in exercising mindfulness of, the victims' families, the suspects' families, and then even law enforcement having tips, and this guy being on their radar.
Outside of these two calls, our agency had not dealt with Robert Card.
Saginaw County Sheriff Joel Mary says Robert Card had never been on his deputies' radar, but that all changed in May when reports obtained by the I-Team show Card's family reached out to the Sheriff's Department, his son telling deputies that Card had been hearing voices or starting to experience paranoia since back in January. The family also saying Card had 10 to 15 handguns and rifles in his home. Deputies later wrote that they reached out to his Army Reserve unit, who agreed to sit down with Card and get him help.
The suspect in the killings, Robert Card, a 40-year-old Army reservist and trained firearms instructor, used a sniper rifle that he purchased legally this year. Also this year, and reportedly sometime after that gun purchase, the suspect had a mental health crisis, one that involved threats of shooting a military base. Two senior law enforcement officials tell NBC News that the suspect was sent by commanders of his military unit for 2 weeks of inpatient psychiatric treatment. Robert Card's sister-in-law also tells NBC News that the family had recently alerted police and military officials when they grew concerned about Card's mental health.
And it seems to be throughout just recorded history of mass shootings happening across the country of, federal officials, law enforcement being aware of a certain mass shooter potential.
A series of private Instagram messages from the shooter are now raising new questions about warning signs missed. The group messages include a discussion about the potential that he is going to become a school shooter. ABC News contributor and former FBI agent Brad Garrett joins me live now for more on this. Brad, these are just the latest in a list of concerning social media posts and messages. What sticks out to you about this group of messages in this particular conversation?
That sadly, they're predictable. If you look at almost every young mass shooter, they leave a trail on social media because that's typically how they communicate. Talking about purchasing weapons, photographs with weapons, talk in very dark, violent ways that actually picks up a short time before the shooting most of the time. And so, again, law enforcement apparently didn't know about this kid in Uvalde. They sort of knew about the kid in Buffalo, but not to the extent they were really keeping track of him. So we go back to the same conversation that if we don't talk to each other, if someone of authority, and it doesn't have to be the police, but mental health, the school officials, etc., if they don't know about somebody escalating, how are they going to stop them?
Mm-hmm. And with your background in cultural anthropology, I think it's like studying how the environment and people and social and how they all interact and, understanding those things. I would like to know, do you see a pattern there, a system of, where, potential mass shootings on, being on the radar, but, falling through the cracks, like they're being missed? Do you see from your background a system there of, I don't know if I'm phrasing it right, of mass shootings, the potential of it happening, but it's being missed on the radar?
I mean, I think that's a really good question. And I think we're all still learning. I mean, in this particular situation, I think that we're still learning a lot about the even recent history of what kind of triggered this and how long it was, on anybody's radar, and what the systems are in place to kind of track that and protect against it. I think it's a really good question. I would love to dig into a little bit deeper. I don't know that I know enough right now to draw that correlation, but I do think that, in other things that I've I don't know. I don't know that I'm going to speak about it very clearly either. It's a really good question, and it would be a really good thing to think about. But I don't know enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's something I'm going to, see maybe if we can.
But worth exploring. I mean, I think kind of what you could be kind of leading to too is like this idea, if you take a very different example, because I'm not as familiar about gun control in a lot of places and what the specific regulations are. That I know that I know some things because I've been researching a little bit with this situation. But if you take a different example of like when things can kind of go in a few different ways. If you think about systems that have a lot of regulation, people might want to rebel against them. Whereas if you have less regulation, you might hope that people will be more upfront about, they'll feel more comfortable if they're feeling like they're being supported. Maybe take it to this example. If you thought that by presenting a mental health risk of somebody that and presenting that to law enforcement in a way that felt really safe and supportive to that person and to the people around them, and obviously to the surrounding community, if that felt like it was less rigid and that was, less penalizing and more supportive of that person, they were going to get help rather than punished. Okay. Maybe that would drive a different kind of solution. I don't know. I mean, but I think about if the drinking age is lower, for example, like it is in Europe, are there as many people that are experimenting as dramatically between the ages of 18 and 21 as they are here? I don't know. Whatever.
That's something to think about, because a lot of people think of how much freedom America offers, but then there's a lot of restrictions as well. And maybe, that's something worth exploring. Are there too many restrictions that causes that when a person has an opportunity to run rampant, they do? It's almost like how some people who go to college, if they were very restricted growing up, they go to college and then they're just off the chain.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard I think with weapons, it's such a complex thing, and it's not something that I don't know, it's growing up in the States, it's something that you'd think that we might or not have more direct experience with. My family just hasn't had a lot of direct experience with that, but
that's good. Hopefully it stays that way.
But I don't know, I don't, it's hard to have a tool that can cause such a permanent response to a temporary feeling, I think is what I've kind of come to feel about it is it's a very, I don't know, it's hard.
Well, you've lived outside of America, St. Martin, even in Spain. I can't say that I've heard of any time that there were mass shootings in Spain or in St. Martin. You've lived in those areas. Do you recall any of those type of moments happening while you were in those countries?
No, and that's one of the things I really I miss about being over. So my husband's family is Spanish, and we lived over there because we were there with them during the pandemic. And I do remember we were actually there when shootings happen in the United States a few times a year. So it's or gun violence in general. It's just one of those things that especially when you're far away from it, you kind of forget that it's so present for us here. And it was because there's such a peace of mind, at least what I felt. And you don't worry about being out late at night because there's just there's a different kind of safety to knowing that there really aren't firearms there. It's just not really on the radar. So to me, that was a relief, but that's my personal experience. I really, I felt much calmer knowing that was not something that was, it certainly wasn't common, and it's not part of their culture. So it's hard for them to understand too, I think, from the outside. But
yeah, so you've lived over there, and you mentioned that it's part of America's culture, but not that of other countries that you've lived in and maybe have visited as well.
Maybe there's the places where I was, the experience I had.
I don't know if you had an opportunity to just kind of network with the locals there and maybe even dig into their thoughts of the culture here in America, but if you did, what's their conversation about when they hear about things that, constant mass shootings at the schools, at the bars, at the movies, is just incessant. I'm not privy to their thoughts across seas, but maybe you are aware of maybe some of their thoughts about what's happening here.
Well, we were also there during the insurrection.
Wow.
So that was kind of an interesting, I think everybody was like, what is going on? This was so unexpected, right? And so the conversations we had around that was that it was just truly unbelievable.
Let's start with American allies. What are they saying?
Well, I think there's a mixture of shock, disbelief, horror. We are hearing very strong words coming from world leaders like Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister here in the United Kingdom. He said disgraceful scenes in the U.S. Congress. The United States stands for democracy around the world, and it is now vital that there should be a peaceful and orderly transfer of power. We were there when that happened, and then I think in general, when things would come up, we'd be like, oh man, this is just so devastating that
we've heard about another event, and it's just so heartbreaking, and like, why is this something that we're even having to be concerned about? I mean, that's where I come from. I know it's it's different for everybody. Sounds like it's very similar to how you feel about it, but it's perplexing, I would say. And it's sort of hard to defend it, like what is the benefit that I see of this happening? Not much, right? And how many more times, and how much, who does it have to be close to for there to be change, right? That can come from it, and what can we learn, right? These are really, I think it's attached to a lot of really deep-seated systemic issues here. So it's hard to unpack, and certainly hard to unpack in each situation. They're so unique, right? But I do think in general the conversations I had about it with people over there were just that it was perplexing and it was unbelievable. Like, what is going on? Like, why could this even? How does this get to this point, right? And so I guess that was what I saw.
So so we're at the point now that y'all were on lockdown. Then you hear reports that the gunman has been found deceased.
Fox News has now confirmed that the suspect in the Maine mass shooting, Robert Card, has been found dead. We're going to have a lot more on this later in the show, but before we get back to it, let me give you a few of the details. They're a little sketchy at this time. All 18 victims have now been identified by authorities. The shelter-in-place order, as everyone knows, has been lifted.
What was the reaction from that you were aware of, or your reaction?
I was relieved. I was relieved that he was found. I think just because I feel like that was a big weight of just like the uncertainty of like, are more people going to get hurt? I don't know. Like, I think that they were pretty sure from what they were saying that he was most likely acting alone. So I don't think that there was a lot of concern that there was anybody else with him that would have, contributed further. But I think it just sort of set a new clock, right? On like, well, now we have this information, and we can kind of like, as a community, try to find ways to. It's going to be different for everybody how we support one another and the support that we all need from each other. But I think most immediately it was relief. Obviously, sadness. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. I don't like hearing anybody losing a life, even if they've done something terrible. It's hard to, I try to remember that they're also a complete person that was, now marked by this series of terrible acts, right? And that's going to be their defining moment, and that's really sad. When you want to think about a complete person who is probably really struggling with something that they didn't have the tools to deal with differently. That breaks my heart for them. It's also I'm beyond devastated for everybody who lost their lives, and the families that were shattered apart by this, and the communities that are shattered. I mean, it's just that doesn't go away. Loss like this doesn't leave you. It stays with you, and it will affect lives and have a ripple effect on lives for a very long time to come. But I think that I initially felt relieved, and obviously, it's anger, like what is that, like full gamut of emotion. But a little bit of peace to just have the ability to have ability to start rebuilding and moving forward and learning from this. And it is just going to take time.
Yes, time definitely is going to take. Well, Emily, as we wrap up, what I do want to ask is Maine is now being remembered by something that you and your family and the community may have never thought that this would happen here. What would you like for others to think about when they think of Maine now? How can we help, what are your thoughts for how people should remember Maine at its darkest moments?
That's a really great question. I would love people to remember kind of how we put our heads and hearts together to work through this. I mean, I think it's usually like a great way to, I mean, not that anybody would wish that this had ever happened, but it's kind of how we, and probably relatable to how you've dealt with, you know, your recent experiences. I had I lost my daughter, so I had a really deep traumatic loss, and how I feel like I try to measure myself now on how I decided to move forward with that grief and learn from the experience that I had and try not to see it as something negative, but something positive. And it's really hard work, right? And I hope that as we move forward, we are reminded of and keep finding new ways to turn this really dark moment into something really positive, whether that's, you know, energetic or something that we learn about ourselves or a way that we help somebody that we're close to, or an organization that's close to our hearts, or, you know, whatever it is. I think it can manifest in a lot of different ways, but I hope that we're remembered for the strength of our community, the resilience of our people, the love we have for one another, even when it's hard, you know, and the ways that we really double down on how to be supportive. And I think that's something that I've always gone back to Maine. You know, I've moved around a lot, I've lived in a lot of different places, and I always go back to Maine, and it's really because of the people that are there. And it's a really, really special place. So I hope I hope we get back on the map as something more in that direction than this really terrible thing that happened, because it's hard not to be defined by these moments, right? But it's how we work with them and move through them that shape us into the best version of ourselves. And hopefully Maine will have, it's going to take time, but I think that we will move forward together in a way that's really positive, I hope.
Yeah, the way that you express how to move forward during darkest hours, during grieving moments, that's really, if there was to be a formula, that would be part of the formula. There is remembering exactly who you were before it happened is the biggest thing. And I know that really helped me finding this version of the new old me, and I hope as well as the community in Maine, in other communities all across, because as I work in news, I deal with this all day and every day. I mean, there's a whole nother side I haven't even talked about, just how exhausting it can be, that it happens incessantly, as I said, and then, you know, there is a wash, rinse, and repeat cycle with our lawmakers, and then, you know, then it creates an insensitivity among others in the community, because then it's normal. It's like, oh, you know, get down. That's just what we do. And then when we pop up, you know, it's back to, you know, giggles, because until the next, you know, wash, rinse, and repeat cycle. So there is not a one way, you know, it's not a one size fits all type of ordeal, but as you expressed, it's just one way to deal with grief. And I hope that, you know, and it's such a, and I'm really hoping that one day my hope will be filled with substance, that one day America won't be known for these types of moments.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So I'm happy to do whatever we can together to see that change. You know, it's gonna take time, but there's a lot that we're all grappling with every day.
It is, and until next time, it's just, you know, where my thoughts are with this. But Emily, I really appreciate you for expressing the thoughts of Maine from your perspective, from your community, because I feel like when, you know, things like this happen, oftentimes the voice of the community gets overshadowed by events that happen there that really cause bloodshed. And my hopes through this interview is that we're able to remember Maine in the community in its brightest moments. And if you haven't been to Maine, because I plan on going, I hope.
Come visit anytime.
I was just gonna say, I hope Emily gives me some of those good lobster, because that's all I want.
That's right. Happy to host you anytime. Would love to share it with you. It is a really magical place. I think it was such a special place to grow up. And I think I shared with you, having moved around so many times before I was 10 years old, when we finally landed there, you know, we were a little bit confused by that choice. You know, obviously we had family there, but, you know, we were like, what is this place? It's really cold, very quiet and very remote, but it is really special. It is, it's a really magical place. So I think, you know, frankly, I do think that a lot of people think about it that way. It's just now there's been a shift, right? And we've got to find ways to build back. I mean, it's easier said than done, but I believe together we can get there. You know, it's gonna be a really big collective effort. So it's like the best moment for us to like really think about how we can support each other, whatever that looks like. So I think it will, as we've said, kind of vary across a range energetically for everybody.
Well, Emily, this has been a pleasure actually seeing you face to face, because she and I would be in each other's chat boxes.
It's so great.
And so now I'm finally putting a face to actually who she is. And it's been, like I said, my heart is full from this conversation and actually getting such an insider view of moments like this. So thank you for sharing this with me and to my viewers. And I believe conversations like this will help us maintain that human element, you know, because sometimes empathy gets lost in tragedies. And so, you know, it's always important to keep that empathetic angle when you talk to people who are tied to tragedies, because you never know where someone is. They could be right there on the edge, and you could be the reason why they jump off or you know, come back to, you know, reality in that aspect. I don't know if I'm saying that right, so don't come for me, guys. You know, don't come for me if I didn't express that right. So
I think it's really well said. I mean, compassion is really everything, and empathy too. You know, we've all got to try, even though it's like it's almost impossible sometimes when you're angry and confused and like questioning why something like this has to happen, because it feels so unbelievable and detached from reality. Like I can never imagine my mind going there, right, or taking this action myself. Like, how can this happen? Are you even thinking about the people on the other side, right? But I think that we have to all remember that we are complete human beings, and we need each other, right?
Yes, we do need each other. And thank you, Emily. Everyone, this is another episode of Pretty Woman Speaks. I am Amy the 7th with my guest Emily Williams of Maine. I'm really appreciative that she came on here and shared her thoughts of the community so that we can actually relate to what her experience in the community may be relating, so that we can help them build back their community blocks, because it all starts with just us. So thank you all for tuning in. Amy the 7th airs each and every Monday at 7 p.m. on all streaming platforms that you can find on my website at tayharborstudios.com/Amy the 7th. Peace and love, everyone.
Thank you so much.
To this, I'm Amy the 7th with a message. In its all relevant knowledge, intelligence, beauty, elegance, wisdom in a prism. Free your brain from the prison. Be kind, be significant. Time to listen in. Be kind, be significant. Live magnificent. It's time to listen in. Be kind, be significant. Time to listen in.